Okay, so I just want to go through the things that are on the calculator part of the final tomorrow. To get started on the packet, there's nothing that came from the log part on this one, so I'm going to start looking at the chapter 4 and 5, day 2 and 3. So the first two problems I want to look at is using your calculator to come up with some trig values. First one says, now obviously you need to first look to see if I'm finding the secant of this angle, that is not a degree sign, so I have to make sure I know that is in radians. Because if there was a degree sign, then I would make sure I'm in degree mode. So go to your calculator. You will be having to do some switching back and forth, so you always want to think about that. Make sure in this one you're in radian mode. So this says I want to take the secant of 0.35 radians. Well, I don't have a secant button, but I do have a cosine button. So what I know is if the secant, I'm looking for the secant of that angle, is the same thing as taking 1 over the cosine of that angle. So you either can type in 1 divided by the cosine of 0.35, or you can find the cosine of 0.35, cosine 0.35, and I know the secant is reciprocal of that number, so I either can take 1 divided by that number, or remember you have a reciprocal button. It's the x to the negative first button, and all you have to do is hit that button. So that will give you the reciprocal of that answer you have right there. So 1 divided by 0.93937 is equal to 1.0645. Okay, so again, what did I do? I knew that I was looking for the secant of an angle. That's equivalent to 1 over the cosine of that same angle. So you either can take 1 divided by the cosine, so you could have typed in 1 divided by cosine of 0.35, you get the same answer. I took the cosine of 0.35 and then divided by, or then took the reciprocal of that. So 1.064 or 065. Okay, so that's using the reciprocal buttons. Then the inverse buttons, remember when you see this, either this or you see arc, that means you're looking for an angle. So this is saying I want to know what angle has a cosecant of 6, which means I'm looking for an angle that has a sine of 1 over 6. So now I know that I'm going to use my inverse sine button. I want to find the inverse sine of 1/6. And I find that's 0.167. When I type that in my calculator, I just have to go second sine of 1 divided by 6, 0.1674. Okay, that's the value. Remember that the calculator will give you the principal value, so you don't have to worry about any of that. So when you see inverse sine of a positive, it'll put it in the first quadrant. If it's the inverse sine of a negative, it will give you a negative angle in the fourth quadrant. So you don't have to worry about any principal values with that. The calculator gives you the principal values. All right, and then the next thing I saw that would be something you want to look at is making sure you know amplitude, period, and phase shift and vertical shift. So given a graph of a sine or cosine, make sure you know that the amplitude is just the absolute value of that number. So 27, the amplitude is 5. Down here, if you looked at the amplitude, it would be 1/2. To find the period, remember, the period is equal to 2 pi divided by b. b is this number right here. So if I take 2 pi divided by pi over 3, I multiplied both the top and bottom by 3, I got 6 pi over pi. The pi's dropped out, I got a period of 6. Okay, so it's just 2 pi divided by b. Down here, you got 2 pi divided by 2, which is pi. All right, phase shift. Phase shift, we say, is equal to the opposite of the c value divided by the b. So c is this number right here that you're adding or subtracting, and b is still that number out in front of the x. So with this one, I take the opposite of this, so negative pi over 6, over the b value, pi over 3. So that's what this says, negative pi over 6 divided by pi over 3. I multiplied by 6 over 6 because I'm trying to get rid of both of those denominators. So I multiplied by 6 over 6. Here the 6 is canceled, I was left with negative pi. Here 3 goes into there twice, so I was left with 2 pi. The pi's drop out, so I got negative 1/2. And again, you can use your calculator, just make sure you get that into a fraction. Don't round anything. But you definitely can use your calculator too if you need that on those. And then remember, vertical shift is just how much you go up or down. So that one has a vertical shift of -2. That one has a vertical shift of 1. Okay, that was that. What else? Law of cosines and law of sines. I give you the law of cosines, remember. You have to know the law of sines, which is the sine of an angle is to the side opposite that, as the sine of a different angle is to its opposite side. Okay, that's the law of sines. You need to know this one. Law of cosines I give you. So I just picked 32. If you have 3 sides, you have to use law of cosines. Now remember the trick. Law of cosines will give you an obtuse angle. Law of sines will not. So if I were going to use law of cosines on these 3, I would first try to find the biggest angle. Because if it's obtuse, which in this case it is, law of cosines will find it for you. So I took c squared, 8 squared, equals the other 2 sides squared, minus 2 times a times b times the cosine of angle c. Again, we give you that formula. C squared equals the other 2 sides squared, minus 2 times those 2 sides, times the cosine of the angle that's opposite this side over here. So when I did that, again, to put that on your calculator, you can try to figure out what all of this is, but just remember this number right here is the coefficient to the cosine of c. So you can't take 4 squared plus 5 squared minus 2 times 4 times 5 and say that's the coefficient of c. You need to take 8 squared, you need to subtract the 4 squared, you need to subtract 5 squared, then you can look at what that would equal. So if you took 8 squared minus 4 squared minus 5 squared, you would get 23. So you could say, after you took care of getting rid of all of those, 23 equals negative 2 times 4 times 5 times the cosine of c. Then you can realize that that is the coefficient. So the coefficient of c is negative 40. So then you can take 23 and divide it by negative 40 to get the cosine of c. Then do inverse cosine of c. It's negative, so you're going to get an obtuse angle. And so I got 125.1. And again, now I need to make sure that when I do inverse sine, I'm back to degrees again. So remember, you always have to think about, is it degrees or is it radians? So I got 125.1. Then I use law of sines. Sine of 125 is to 8, because they're opposite of each other, as the sine of b is to 5. I cross multiply 5 times the sine of 125.1. It has to equal 8 times sine of b. So if I do 8 sine of b equals whatever you get when you multiply those two together. To solve, you're just going to divide by 8 and then do inverse sine. And you don't have to worry about a second solution or anything like that, because you already know c is an obtuse angle. So you know that b, when you get it, that's the answer you get. It's going to be an acute angle. It's 30.8. Take those two, subtract from 180. I don't need to see that work. I just need to see that that's 24.1. Okay, so I give you law of cosines, but you have to be able to use it and then know the law of sines. The area problem, I give you this formula for area. Formula for the area is 1/2 AB sine C. So I give you this angle C is 112, so the sine of 112. A and B are these two sides, so 1/2 A times B times sine of C. Just punch that in your calculator. Again, make sure you're in degrees. And I got 4.26 inches squared, because it is an area, so it's a square unit. I think I will do another video to try to finish the rest. So that's all just the trig stuff that's on the calculator portion.